If you are in the United States and a police officer tells you that you cannot record them or demands that you stop recording immediately, what are your actual legal rights in that moment? Can they legally force you to stop? Can they take your phone? Can they delete your footage on the spot? Or are you fully protected under the Constitution, even in that high pressure situation? This is one of the most misunderstood topics in modern law enforcement encounters, especially in the age of smartphones where almost every interaction can be recorded instantly. And the reality is, the law is actually clearer than most people think, but the situation on the ground is far more complicated than the law books make it seem. Because knowing your rights is one thing, but applying them calmly while standing in front of armed officers is something completely different. So today, we are going to break this down in extreme detail. Not just the legal theory, but also how these situations actually play out in real life. What courts have said, what officers are trained to do, and most importantly, what you should realistically do to protect yourself without escalating the situation unnecessarily. Let's start from the foundation. In the United States, the First Amendment protects freedom of speech and freedom of the press. Over time, multiple federal courts have interpreted this protection to include the right of individuals to record public officials, including police officers, while they are performing their duties in public spaces. This means that in general, if you are in a public place, you have the right to record police activity. But like most legal rights, this is not absolute in every possible situation. It is subject to certain limitations, especially when it comes to safety, interference, and active investigations. Now, before we go deeper, we need to clearly separate two things. There is a big difference between recording police and interfering with police. Recording is observation, interference is disruption. And that difference is where almost every real world conflict begins. Let's take a simple real life scenario. You are standing on a sidewalk. A police stop is happening nearby. You take out your phone and start recording. You are not shouting. You are not moving into the scene. You are not blocking officers. You are simply observing. An officer notices you and walks over and says, "You need to stop recording." Now, at this moment, many people panic and assume that they must obey immediately. But legally speaking, in most jurisdictions, simply recording from a lawful public vantage point is protected activity. However, the officer may still instruct you to move back or change position if they believe your presence is interfering with their work or creating a safety concern. So the key question is not, are you recording? The key question becomes, are you interfering? And interference is judged based on behavior, distance, tone, movement, and situation context. Now let's take this further. Imagine you are closer to the scene. Maybe you stepped off the sidewalk, maybe you moved closer for a better angle. The officer now raises their voice and tells you again to stop recording or move back. At this point, law enforcement is likely shifting their focus from passive observation to scene control. Police officers are trained to maintain control over active scenes, especially traffic stops or arrests. Anything they perceive as distracting, unpredictable, or potentially escalating can be treated as interference. So, while you may still have the right to record, you may not have the right to remain in a specific position if that position is considered unsafe or disruptive. This is an extremely important distinction that most people online completely ignore. Now, let's talk about the most sensitive part of this entire topic. What happens if a police officer demands your phone, or tells you to delete the recording, or tries to physically take your device? This is where constitutional protections under the Fourth Amendment come into play. Your phone is considered private property and also a digital container of personal information. Under normal legal standards, law enforcement cannot simply take your phone without proper legal justification. That justification usually requires either probable cause, a warrant, or exigent circumstances. Exigent circumstances are emergency situations where immediate action is needed, such as preventing destruction of evidence or stopping an ongoing crime. But simply recording police activity in a public place does not automatically create legal grounds for seizure. Now let's be very realistic here. Even though the law may be on your side, real-life encounters are not courtroom debates. They are fast, emotional, and controlled environments. So officers may still issue commands like stop recording or delete that footage, even when those commands are not legally enforceable. This creates a psychological pressure situation, and this is where many people make mistakes. They either become aggressive or they panic and comply without understanding their rights. Both reactions can create problems. Now let's shift into another scenario that is even more common. Traffic stops. You are inside your car. You get pulled over. You start recording the interaction with your phone. Is that legal? In general, yes. Recording from inside your vehicle is also protected, as long as you are not interfering with the officer's duties. But traffic stops are different from passive public observation because the officer has direct authority over the stop itself. During a traffic stop, officers are allowed to issue certain safety instructions. For example, keeping your hands visible, rolling down windows, or avoiding sudden movements. These instructions are designed for officer safety, not to restrict your recording rights. However, if the officer believes your actions create a safety risk, they may escalate control measures. Now let's talk about behavior because this is where things become very important. Courts and police reports often reference something called furtive movement behavior. This refers to sudden, unclear, or suspicious movements inside a vehicle or near officers. For example, reaching under the seat suddenly, moving hands out of view, turning around quickly, trying to hide or retrieve objects. Even if your intention is harmless, these actions can be interpreted as potential threats. And interpretation matters a lot in real-time police encounters, because officers do not operate with perfect information. They operate with perception and training under pressure. Now let's go deeper into what happens if the officer escalates and asks you to stop recording in a traffic stop. At this point, the legal framework still does not automatically remove your recording rights, but the officer may claim that your actions are interfering with the stop. And if they make that determination, they may order you to change behavior or position. This is why most legal experts recommend a very controlled approach. Stay calm. Keep your phone steady. Do not move aggressively. Do not argue. Do not interrupt instructions. And do not escalate verbally, because escalation is where most legal protections start to get complicated in practice. Now let's address a very important misunderstanding. Many people believe that if a police officer tells you to stop recording, you should immediately argue your constitutional rights on the spot. But in reality, roadside or street-side encounters are not legal debate forums. Even if you are legally correct, arguing in the moment rarely improves the outcome. Because officers are not judges. They are not there to interpret constitutional law in real time. They are there to control a situation. Legal arguments are designed for courts, not sidewalks. Now let's talk about another scenario that happens often in viral videos. Police telling someone to delete footage. Legally speaking, deletion of recorded content generally requires a legal process. That means either a warrant or a court order, depending on the situation. Without that, forcing deletion raises serious constitutional concerns under both First and Fourth Amendment principles. However, in real-life encounters, officers may still attempt to persuade or pressure individuals to delete footage. This is where understanding becomes powerful. Because when you understand that a verbal request is not the same as legal authority, you are in a much stronger mental position. Now let's discuss something very important that most people never consider. Even though recording police is legal in many situations, the safest approach is not just about legality, it is about survival strategy. Meaning, how do you protect yourself while also avoiding unnecessary escalation? The answer is controlled behavior. Stay at a safe distance. Do not block movement. Do not interfere with commands. Keep your phone stable, avoid sudden gestures, and do not enter active enforcement space. This keeps you within both legal and practical safety boundaries. Now let's go even deeper into real-world outcomes. There have been many cases where individuals were detained or questioned after recording police, not because recording itself was illegal, but because officers claimed interference or obstruction. In those cases, courts often later examine whether the behavior actually justified the officer's response. And that is where legal accountability happens after the fact, not in the moment. Now let's talk about something very important. What should you do if an officer directly threatens you while recording? For example, If you don't stop recording, you will be arrested. In that situation, the most legally safe response is not confrontation. It is calm compliance with safety instructions while maintaining your awareness of rights. Because again, legal disputes are resolved later, not in the moment of confrontation. Now let's bring this all together. In the United States, recording police in public spaces is generally protected under the First Amendment. However, that right exists alongside police authority to maintain safety, control scenes, and prevent interference. That means both sides exist at the same time. Your right to record is real, but it is not unlimited in how you behave around active law enforcement operations. The most important takeaway is this: knowing your rights protects you legally, but knowing how to exercise those rights protects you practically. Because the real world is not just law, it is law plus human behavior plus high pressure decision making. And when you understand all three, you are no longer reacting blindly in the moment. You are acting with awareness, and that awareness is what truly keeps you safe while exercising your rights.